Good morning. On behalf of RSL Victoria, welcome to the Shrine of Remembrance. As we come together on the lands of the Bunurong, I invite Uncle Shane Clark, Bunurong Elder, to present a welcome to country.
Thank you, Justin. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Wominjinka, welcome to the lands of the Bunurong. My name's Shane Clark, a traditional custodian of these lands of where we are today. As we always do, we start by acknowledging the ones that have come before us and pay our respects to our elders, both past and present, and we have elders here with us today. It's a great morning. We all come together and it's in strength to pay our respects and to reflect, to acknowledge the ones that came before us, who dedicated and made a commitment, and we all have a connection to these people who've done the hard work, and so that we are here today. And I'd also like to extend my respects out to all our servicemen and women of the Australian services, and to our brothers and sisters of New Zealand. So all our Air Force, Navy, military, Army, we never forget that you are here today. And also like to just want to finish off, just a welcome to country, just to say a few words, and just to remember that we're always walking side by side. It's great to see everybody coming out this morning. And so Wominjinka, Oriya Wantalang Bunurong. Welcome all our friends to the lands of the Bunurong. Let's walk together and learn together and stay well. Thank you.
Uncle Shane, thank you very much. And we wish to tell Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander attendees and viewers that this morning's presentation, which is beginning soon, contains images of deceased persons. Ladies and gentlemen, the dawn service begins at 6 o'clock this morning, and we will come back shortly with our presentation. Hello, my name is Justin Smith, and it's an honour to be standing here with you in this place before dawn. Please ensure your mobile phone is put on silent, and good morning. The dawn service will begin at 6 with the official ceremony. Just first, we'd like to pay tribute to Mr. Peter Meehan for the way he has performed this very role from this very lectern for the last 10 years. Peter is a retired squadron leader of the Royal Australian Air Force Specialist Reserve and a current governor of our Shrine of Remembrance. For your beautiful words and your service through the years. Thank you, Peter. We're here before the soft lights of dawn to be grateful for the lives we have and to thank those who gave up so much so that we could have them. We're here to tell the servicemen and servicewomen and their families that we understand the sacrifice and the courage, and that we will always remember. We thank the ones who are here with us this morning, the ones who are gone, and the ones who were lost long before they could have full lives of their own. Most didn't plan to be soldiers, none planned to be widows, and no child expected to grow up without a father or mother. But it's what happened, and it was done for us. So as we move closer to daylight, around the flame or in the dark, we say thank you forever. Thank you. This year marks the 70th anniversary of the end of the Korean War. To the veterans of Korea who are here this morning or watching and listening from somewhere else, welcome. Without flattery, Korea has been called the Forgotten War. In 1950, the bitter shock and sacrifice of World War II was still with us. Australia remained under war rationing for necessities like petrol and tea and butter, and we want nothing to do with war. But in a place called Korea, the North invaded the South, and so we were at war again. First, it was our Royal Australian Navy with the HMAS Shoalhaven and Bataan, and the Royal Australian Air Force arriving within days of the invasion. And coming out of the long winter of fighting in 1951, where it was so cold the decks of the ships were covered with snow, and the soldiers on land couldn't leave their boots outside because the icy night would turn them to concrete. The men of the 3rd Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment fought one of our hardest battles in Korea, the Battle of Kapyong. Joined by their Anzac comrades from New Zealand, as well as a Canadian battalion, British forces, and United States tanks and cavalry, the 3rd Battalion fought back a Chinese attack that was determined to take the city of Seoul. Our United Nations forces were vastly outnumbered, but they fought for almost 5 days through the day and the night, and Seoul wasn't taken, and it never was, even to this day. The Battle of Kapyong can be spoken of among Australia's strongest and bravest moments. And the 3rd Battalion was awarded the US Presidential Unit Citation. But there was loss, as there always was. 32 Australian troops were killed and 59 wounded and 3 taken prisoner. And after the battle, the bravery continued with those 3 prisoners of war. One was Private Horace Madden. The boys called him Slim. As a prisoner of the Chinese, Slim refused to cooperate with his captors. In the greatest of Australian ways, he was a troublemaker. But as a result, he was beaten and denied food, and what little food he did have, he often gave to his comrades, who he thought were in need more than himself. His behaviour and determination inspired everyone around him and kept others going when they were running low on reasons. One of his mates said this: "Slim was a hero. He didn't try to be like that, it was just the way he was made. Nothing could make him cooperate with the enemy." But Horace Madden died in the POW camp from malnutrition and bad treatment in the November of 1951. But the inspiration continued. His actions as a prisoner of war were so strong that he was posthumously awarded the George Cross, the non-combat equivalent of the Victoria Cross. It was the highest decoration given to an Australian in the Korean War. And it's impossible to speak of the Battle of Kaviong without the name of Captain Reginald Saunders. Reg Saunders was the first Indigenous man to be commissioned as an officer in the Australian Army. His family had already served in the Boer War, the Great War, and Reg joined up for the Second World War, fighting in Greece, Crete and North Africa before he was commissioned a lieutenant and patrol commander in New Guinea. And when the war ended, Reg wanted to keep serving, so he volunteered for the British Commonwealth Occupation Force in Japan. But they would not accept Aboriginals, nor could he buy a beer with his comrades in many of the pubs in Australia. The colour of his skin that was good enough for war was not good enough for peace. So he settled here in Melbourne with his young wife Dorothy. She herself had served in the Women's Auxiliary Australian Air Force, and Reg took what jobs he could. He was a tram conductor for a time, and may well have rattled along the lines of St Kilda Road that runs beside us this morning. You could forgive him if he was dispirited by rejection and discrimination. But when there was trouble in Korea, Reg joined up again. He was appointed a captain with the 3rd Battalion and fought at the Battle of Kaviong. In the air over Korea, the famed No. 77 Squadron of the RAAF served with impact and bravery from the very start of the Korean War, and were the first Australians into action. The squadron was formed in 1942. They fought through the Second World War and then stayed in Japan until 1950. And they were just about to return to Australia when the war began in Korea. So they didn't get home. They went straight back into a new fight. They flew almost 19,000 sorties in the conflict, and their service was so inspiring that the squadron was said to have helped secure the Anzac Treaty with the United States. But the cost was enormous. 1 in 4 pilots from No. 77 Squadron were killed or taken prisoner. And when our soldiers came home from Korea in 1953, they returned to a country that was still weary of war. And they didn't get the welcome nor recognition that we owed them. And it's not the first time we've made that mistake. But for us now, the ones who carry our history forward, the Korean War will only be the forgotten war if we let it. Because for the more than 17,000 Australian men and women who served there, it won't be forgotten, nor for the 1,200 who were wounded. And for the 339 killed, with 43 missing in action, it can't be forgotten. And with Australian personnel continuing to serve in the DMZ between North and South Korea, still the deadliest strip of land in the world, the conflict has not ended, even 70 years later. So to the veterans of the Korean War and their families, thank you. You are loved and respected, and we remain proud and grateful. In the history of our country at war, 103,021 Australians have fallen. Trooper Victor Jones was the first soldier from an Australian unit to be killed in combat. He was in B Company of the Queensland Mounted Infantry and died near South Africa's Modder River on New Year's Day, 1900, in the Boer War. It was the first day of a new century and exactly 1 year before Australia became a nation. Victor Jones came from Rockhampton and worked in the gold mines. His mates called him a fine and steady young gentleman. And fighting in South Africa as he waited for 1 century to end, he must have wondered what the new one had planned for him when he got home. But he didn't get to see it. And more wars came, the size of which this lad from the subtropics could not have imagined, with battles and campaigns that brought enormous loss, such as the Battle of Fromelles, 1916, with 5,500 casualties in just one night. The battles of Bullecourt, 10,000 killed or wounded. Gallipoli, where the Anzac was born. More than 11,000 Australian and New Zealand troops killed. The New Guinea campaign from 1942, when the world was already in war, there was a new threat, and this one was coming straight at us. We know Australia would have been lost if not for the soldiers in the mud of Kokoda, the sailors in the Coral Sea, and the pilots who may have been outnumbered and outgunned by the Japanese but still got their planes in the air anyway. Australia was saved by 7,000 Australians, and the 7,000 Australians who saved it would never see home again. Over 1,000 Australian POWs and civilians were lost with the sinking of the Japanese vessel Montevideo Maru, 1942, the wreckage of which has only just been found a few days ago. A year later, 268 medical personnel, civilians and troops were killed when the hospital ship Centaur was torpedoed off Point Lookout, Queensland, taking just 3 minutes to sink. And this year marks the 55th anniversary of the battles of Coral Balmoral in the Vietnam War. It was our biggest campaign in the conflict against the strongest of the North Vietnamese forces, and our biggest loss of life in Vietnam. 3 weeks of fighting brought an Australian victory, but Coral Balmoral cost 25 lives and 109 wounded. We welcome all veterans of Vietnam and their families today. Since the first Australian lost in war, our troops have died in the deserts, the fields, the sea, the air, the jungles, the torn-up cities of Europe, the small towns that still talk with reverence of the Australians who saved them, and the attacks on our very homes, such as Darwin and Sydney Harbour. And after that first name, Victor Jones, 103,020 more were lost to us. Behind each were shattered families and mates, communities gutted, broken generations that could only be survived, never fully repaired. And yet when each new conflict came, the next generation was ready to serve. Since Trooper Victor Jones, the loss has been unthinkable, yet the capacity for bravery and sacrifice seems inexhaustible. We welcome the members of our peacekeeping forces who have served in places across the world that were completely without peace, like Rwanda and the massacre at the refugee camp of Kibeho in April '95, where an Australian medical team led by Captain Carol Vaughan Evans treated and evacuated the wounded, including many children, even while under fire, with our medics taking cover behind vehicles and sandbags. 3 medals of gallantry were awarded from the action, including to Captain Vaughan Evans, the only female to ever receive the medal, and the first gallantry medals since Vietnam. Platoon Sergeant Kevin O'Halloran was there, and he wrote of the events years later. He said this: "Fear is infectious, but what I didn't realise until Kibeho was that courage is infectious in the same way." Long before PTSD was an acronym, servicemen and women have returned home and struggled to get back the lives they had or the lives they wanted. It wasn't fully understood, and sometimes it still isn't. This morning we welcome the veterans of the Afghanistan War. More than 26,000 Australians served in Afghanistan. It was our biggest and longest war, with 41 deaths and hundreds wounded. It was a place of fierce fighting, the danger of ambush, hidden explosives, remote patrol bases, and often unidentifiable enemies. At the Battle of Khazorazgan, our troops travelling in convoy were ambushed by 200 Taliban. It was one of our largest battles since Vietnam, and where Trooper Mark Donaldson of the SAS ran 80 metres in the open to save an interpreter, to where he received the Victoria Cross. And Sergeant Troy Simmons, who was one of 9 Australians wounded in the battle, still carries a Taliban bullet in his pelvis to this day. We remember Afghanistan as a place of great sacrifice. In the August of 2012, 3 Australians, Private Robert Pote, Lance Corporal Stefan Milosevic, and Sapper James Martin were killed at their patrol base. Their mission was to train Afghan National Army, but a once trusted Afghan soldier fired on the men as they rested. It was a slow and heartbreaking war, and its consequences surround us in our news, in our homes, in our hospitals, and in our streets. And we know veterans of all conflicts suffer from disconnection, addiction, homelessness, and thoughts of taking their own lives. When they go away to serve, we need them, but when they return, they need us. Today, we honour the sacrifice, the courage, the true and unquestioned mateship, the continuing struggles, and the service. And we do it with the real celebration and the real ceremony that is inside each of us and what's in our mind when the sun appears. We might think of Ren Saunders on that tram, or freezing winters of Korea, or a medic under fire, or a veteran lost in his own hometown, or people who thought their war was forgotten being told it is not. And those 3 strong and beautiful words become stronger still, lest we forget. Would the official party please be upstanding for the dawn service? Let silent contemplation be your offering. Dr. Robert Webster, State President, RSL Victoria, will recite the ode.
In memory of the fallen. They went with songs to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. lest we forget. Stand down.
The official party may now be seated. We now welcome Professor James Angus, Lieutenant Governor of Victoria, to present the Anzac Day Address.
Mr Anthony Howard, the Honourable Daniel Andrews, Premier of Victoria, the Honourable Bill Shorten, representing the Prime Minister of Australia, Mr Matt Bark, representing the Leader of the Victorian Opposition, the Right Honourable the Lord Mayor Sally Capp, Senator David Van, representing the Leader of the Federal Opposition, Shane Patton, Chief Commissioner of Victoria Police, Captain Stephen Bowater, Chair of the Shrine Trustees, Dr Robert Webster, State President, and members of RSL Victoria, and members of other ex-service organisations, Victorian senior officers of the Australian Defence Force, representatives of the New Zealand Defence Force and other defence forces, members of the Consular Corps. I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered, the Bunurong, Boon Wurrong and Wiradjuri Woy Wurrong peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to the elders past and present, and thank in particular Uncle Shane Clark for his warm welcome to country this morning. I also want to acknowledge past and present members of the Australian Defence Force with us today, and thank each and every one of you for your service. And given this year marks the 70th anniversary of the end of the Korean War, I particularly want to acknowledge the veterans of that conflict. More than 17,000 Australians served in the Korean War between 1950 and 1953. They were soldiers and sailors, airmen and nurses. Of those servicemen and women, 30 were captured, 1,216 wounded, and 340 were killed. After the armistice, Australians stayed on the Korean Peninsula as peacekeepers for another 4 years. But their service and sacrifice was, compared to the world wars, largely overlooked at the time. This morning, at Melbourne's most sacred place, we have an opportunity to make amends by commemorating the 17,000 who fought in the Korean War. To that end, I would like to read 2 short excerpts from Unit War Diaries written during the Korean conflict. Unit War Diaries are, by necessity, exercises in brevity. They compress the actions of the longest days into terse, sawn-off sentences. But occasionally, the single-spaced, typewritten pages of those diaries are a doorway into the past, because they reveal a glimmer of how much was asked and how much was given and how much it all means. Take Anzac Day 1952, for example. The 1st Battalion Royal Australian Regiment, 1 RAR, hadn't yet seen action. The battalion had only landed in Korea earlier that month. When they sailed into Busan port, they'd been welcomed by a Royal Marine Band playing Waltzing Matilda. Now, 3 weeks later, 71 years ago today, they found themselves standing on a parade ground carved out of a paddy field with men from 3 RAR, the 17th Field Battery of the Royal New Zealand Artillery, and the King's Own Scottish Borders. Representatives of the Turkish Army were also on hand, making that Anzac Day an historic occasion. The unit's war diary explains why it was historic. It reads, "This day was the first occasion in history on which our former enemies, the Turks, were present with us to pay homage to those who fell on the barren slopes of Gallipoli." Another day, December the 1st, 1951, is more tragic than historic. The diary entry for that day on HMAS Sydney reads as follows: "A costly day, during which 54 sorties were flown. 4 Sea Furies were hit by flak, 2 being lost and 2 other damaged. Sub-Lieutenant Sinclair, RAN, was killed when his body struck the tailplane of his aircraft whilst bailing out. The body was recovered by helicopter and at 17:30 hours, buried at sea. That young airman was just 22. What I take from those entries is this: every Anzac Day is both historic and tragic. Historic because each year marks the anniversary of another war, another battle. Tragic because of the terrible price paid by young Australians like Sub-Lieutenant Sinclair to create that history, our history. In other words, their sacrifice is our inheritance. And as the inheritors of Anzac Day, we have an obligation to never forget the past sacrifices that made possible our future. With that in mind, I would like to conclude by reading the opening lines from the unit diary of 1 RAR for April 25, 1952. The entry, written by an unknown soldier, is as follows: "A grey, overcast sky heralded in another Anzac Day to members of 1 RAR. For those who served in World War II, it brought vivid memories of those comrades who made the supreme sacrifice in the case of freedom. For those of the new generation, it brought the knowledge that within a very short time, they too would know, understand, and share in this wonderful spirit of Anzac." At the conclusion, the bugle call sounded the retreat, and all present observed the 2-minute silence, a silence broken only by the distant sound of artillery fire, continuing the battle for freedom, lest we forget.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. The poem "In Flanders Fields" by Colonel John McCrae will now be recited by Ms. Caitlin Fankhauser, Shrine Young Ambassador.
In Flanders Fields by John McCrae. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place. And in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields.
Thank you, Caitlin. The Melbourne Symphony Orchestra Chorus, accompanied by the Navy Band, present "Abide With Me." Will the official party please be upstanding as the Navy Band and the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra Chorus present the national anthems of New Zealand and Australia. The official party will now move to the sanctuary of the Shrine of Remembrance, where the Lieutenant Governor will lay a wreath. Members of the official party are carrying red poppies, which they will lay at the stone. The red poppy, symbolic of Remembrance Day, is now used at all services honouring our veterans. The red poppies were the first flowers to grow in the springs at Flanders and across the once battle-mangled land of the Western Front during the First World War. And the sweet and delicate red bloom is a sign of life, a symbol of giving, and a reminder that even from the horror, there will be a future. With the official party in position in the sanctuary, I invite the Shrine Guard to mount. The Lieutenant Governor will now lay a wreath at the Stone of Remembrance on behalf of the people of Victoria. The Lieutenant Governor will now depart while the pipes and drums of the 5th 6th Battalion of the Royal Victoria Regiment perform Sands of Kuwait with the Navy Band. The official party will lay their poppies as they follow the Lieutenant Governor's departure. Shrine Guard, please dismount. That concludes the Anzac Day Dawn Service. On behalf of RSL Victoria, thank you for standing with us in this peaceful reflection of dawn here at the Shrine of Remembrance, as we remember all those who served and the people who miss them and love them. You will shortly be welcome to lay a poppy in the sanctuary. We invite you to make your way to the North Steps. Thank you. Good morning. Lest we forget.